Ladies and gentlemen, we are not alone in this world. There are forces, unseen, subtle, and insidious, that work tirelessly against the good. And if we are honest, we must admit that these forces do not always appear in monstrous form. They do not wear horns or breathe fire. No, their craft is far more delicate. They whisper rather than shout. They nudge rather than shove. They slip into the hearts of those we love and, if we are not careful, into our own. I do not mean to suggest that every act of selfishness or every moment of anger is evidence of full-blown possession. If that were the case, we would all have to be exercised daily before breakfast. No, the real trick of the enemy is more subtle. He does not need to make men into beasts, only to make them comfortable in their own corruption. There is a certain kind of person, perhaps you have met one, who seems unable to leave well enough alone. Wherever they go, discord follows. At first you might think it is mere coincidence, a harmless remark here, an innocent observation there, and suddenly two close friends are glaring at each other across a table. Families that once gathered in warmth find themselves treading carefully, watching their words, uncertain when or how the harmony was lost. But if you watch closely, if you listen with care, you will see a pattern emerge. Division does not happen by accident. It is a thing cultivated, watered, and carefully tended. Not with great dramatic upheavals. No, those are too obvious, too easily resisted. The trick is always small at first. A quiet suggestion that one person has been slighted, a gentle nudge towards suspicion, a well-placed comment seemingly off-handed which forces a wedge where once there was none. It is rare for outright lies to be used at the beginning. Half-truths serve much better. The goal is not to deceive outright, but to distort just enough that the hearer begins to think they have reached their own conclusion. And what a pleasurable thing it is to be the one who sees through the facade. There is a thrill in believing that one has uncovered a hidden motive, that one is no longer naive like the others. This thrill is a dangerous thing. Once a man begins to enjoy it, he will not be satisfied with merely seeing division. He will begin to create it. Oh, not consciously, not at first. He will merely point out things others have failed to notice. He will say, "I just think it's strange that," or "It's odd, isn't it, how often she does that?" And soon a seed of doubt is planted. The seed does not need constant watering. It will grow on its own, feeding off old wounds, imagined slights, and the natural human tendency to resent what we do not understand. Even if the one who planted it steps away, the effects linger. The next time the two friends speak, there is hesitation. Where once they would have laughed at a careless remark, now they wonder, did they mean something by that? An innocent gesture is scrutinized. A missed invitation becomes an insult. And before long, division has taken root. The one who started it all may not even recognize their role. Or worse, they may see what has happened and take a secret satisfaction in it, because there is a peculiar delight in being the one others confide in, the one who seems to know what no one else does. If a person's worth is built on this, then division is not merely a byproduct of their actions, it is their lifeblood. They must keep the turmoil alive lest they become irrelevant, and so they continue. What is most chilling about all this is that division rarely looks like evil when it begins. It often wears the mask of concern. It presents itself as insight, as honesty, even as a desire to help. And so, good people are drawn into it before they realize what has happened. They believe they are simply protecting themselves, or helping a friend see the truth, or standing up for what is right. Meanwhile, the ties that once bound them to others grow thin. Evil does not need to create new weapons. It only needs to twist the good things that already exist. Love becomes jealousy, trust becomes suspicion, and wisdom becomes cynicism. The great tragedy of division is not that it destroys relationships. That is merely the symptom. The true tragedy is that it makes enemies out of those who once stood together. It isolates men and women in their own minds, convincing them that they are safer alone, that they are better off distrusting, that unity is weakness. And so, the one who loves division never runs out of work. There will always be more grievances to uncover, more misunderstandings to exploit, more fractures to widen. Because as long as people believe they have something to gain from breaking what was once whole, the enemy has already won. Truth, when it is inconvenient, is an unwelcome guest. It knocks at the door persistently, yet many would rather draw the curtains and pretend no one is there. This is because truth has a peculiar way of demanding something from us. It requires acknowledgement, and with acknowledgement often comes change. A man who loves the light will step into it gladly, but the man who has built his life on shadows will do everything in his power to shut it out. The disdain for truth rarely begins as outright rejection. Instead, it starts with small compromises, little evasions, slight alterations to make reality more palatable. A person may not even realize they are doing it at first. They tell themselves they are simply being careful, considering all perspectives, avoiding extremes. But in time, they develop a habit of bending truth ever so slightly, shaving off the edges where it is too sharp, sanding down its surface until it fits neatly into whatever they wish to believe. What makes this so dangerous is that falsehood is always easier than truth. It is more comfortable, more convenient, more adaptable to personal desires. A man who seeks truth must be willing to confront his own errors, admit his own failings, and accept that the world is not arranged for his comfort. But the one who despises truth will take the opposite path. He will shape reality to suit himself. He will adjust the facts to fit his preferences, ignore the ones that challenge him, and invent others when necessary. One of the most effective ways to do this is to treat truth as something flexible, something subjective. What is true for you may not be true for me, they will say, as if truth were a personal possession, like a favorite coat that fits one man but not another. They will insist that all perspectives are equally valid, that facts are merely interpretations, that nothing can ever be truly known. This is not wisdom, it is an escape. For if truth is not absolute, then no one is ever truly wrong, and more importantly, no one ever has to change. At times, this disdain for truth is masked as sophistication. There is a certain pride in being too clever to accept anything as definite. These are the people who scoff at sincerity, who find amusement in exposing contradictions, who believe it is far more intelligent to raise endless doubts than to arrive at any firm conclusions. The irony, of course, is that by denying the existence of absolute truth, they end up enslaved to the very thing they claim to reject. If there is no truth, then there is only power, the strongest voice, the loudest argument, the most convenient narrative. This is the goal, though many who fall into it do not recognize it. The rejection of truth is never neutral. It does not leave a man free to think as he pleases. It leaves him vulnerable to every manipulation, every falsehood, every whim of those who have already abandoned the search for what is real. He may believe he is choosing his own way, but in reality he is merely following the strongest tide, tossed by every wave, never standing on solid ground. Even among those who openly reject truth, there is often a contradiction. They will claim that nothing is certain, yet expect you to accept their own statements as unquestionable. They will say that all perspectives are equally valid until they find one they despise. They will insist that morality is relative until someone wrongs them. The man who denies truth cannot live consistently, for even his denial assumes the very thing he rejects. But perhaps the most telling sign of the disdain for truth is how those who reject it react when confronted with it. A man who is merely mistaken will listen, consider, and perhaps even change his mind. But the one who despises truth will respond with hostility. He will not argue. He will mock. He will not reason. He will dismiss. He will not seek understanding. He will seek to silence. For deep down, he does not reject truth because he has examined it and found it wanting. He rejects it because he knows it threatens the comfortable world he has built, and he would rather defend his illusions than surrender to reality. There was a time when men knew how to revere. They built great cathedrals, not for utility, but for awe. They spoke of certain things in hushed tones, not because they were ignorant, but because they understood that some things are too grand, too mysterious, too weighty for flippancy. They recognized that to treat the highest things lightly was not a mark of intelligence, but of foolishness. But times change, and with them so do the ways men speak of what is sacred. The easiest way to corrupt a man is not to make him openly deny the good, but to make him laugh at it. Contempt, after all, is a more powerful weapon than argument. The debater may win or lose, but the mocker does not engage in debate at all. He sneers, and the battle is won before it begins. Holiness, virtue, love, sacrifice, what defense do these have against ridicule, if those who hold them dear are too timid to stand firm? Once a thing is laughed at, it seems smaller, weaker, less worthy of devotion, and so laughter becomes the crowbar that pries the sacred from its pedestal. This sort of laughter is not the joyful mirth of the innocent, nor the hearty humor of those who see the world's absurdities and yet still love it. No, this laughter is different. It is the laughter that carries with it a sneer, the kind that delights in reducing, belittling, stripping away dignity. It is the laughter that takes a noble thing, a prayer, a vow, an act of self-denial, and twists it until it appears foolish or hypocritical. The man who laughs in this way believes himself clever. He believes he is too wise to be taken in by solemnity. But what he does not realize is that he has blinded himself. He has not seen through anything, he has only dulled his ability to see at all. What begins as laughter soon becomes indifference. Once a thing is ridiculed, it is difficult to take it seriously again. If reverence is a fire, then mockery is the cold wind that snuffs it out. A man who has been trained to laugh at sacred things will, in time, cease to believe they have any real meaning at all. Why kneel in prayer if prayer is nothing but an outdated superstition? Why speak of honor if honor is a relic of a bygone age? Why strive for purity if purity is something to be scoffed at? Once reverence is lost, it does not return easily. It is tempting to think that mockery of the sacred is a harmless game, that it is merely humor, that it takes nothing away, but this is a lie. A man who mocks the sacred does not remain unchanged. The scoffer believes he is chipping away at something external, but in truth he is hollowing out his own soul. He is making himself incapable of wonder, incapable of gratitude, incapable of recognizing when he stands on holy ground. The end of this road is not merely irreverence, it is emptiness. It is a life in which nothing is higher than the self, nothing is greater than the momentary pleasure of scorn, nothing is truly worth living for. There are those who will argue that nothing should be above ridicule, that humor is the mark of a free mind, but this too is false. The free mind knows what is worthy of laughter and what is worthy of silence. It knows the difference between jests that bring joy and those that bring decay. The man who mocks the sacred in the name of freedom is like a child who laughs while tearing apart a songbird, not realizing that he is destroying the very thing that once made his world beautiful. And when he has finished, when all that once held meaning has been reduced to a joke, he will wonder why he feels so alone. No man likes to think himself wicked. He may commit evil, he may indulge in cruelty, he may let selfishness reign over his every action, but he will still find a way to assure himself that he is not in fact a bad person. The great trick of vice is that it does not demand an open declaration of allegiance. It does not need a man to call himself a villain. It only needs him to justify each wrongdoing until, without realizing it, he has reshaped his entire moral framework to accommodate his desires. The first excuse is always necessity. I had no choice, a man will say when caught in wrongdoing. He will explain that circumstances left him with no alternative, that he was driven to his actions by forces beyond his control. It was not greed that made him cheat, but survival. It was not betrayal, but self-preservation. It was not cowardice, but prudence. He will paint himself not as an agent of his own downfall, but as a victim of fate, as though virtue itself were a luxury only afforded to those in easier conditions. The truth, of course, is that a man always has a choice, though he may not like the price of making the right one. If necessity does not serve, then another excuse is readily at hand: comparison. At least I am not as bad as him. How often this phrase has saved men from the discomfort of repentance. A thief will comfort himself by pointing to the murderer. A liar will excuse his falsehoods by thinking of the corrupt politician. No matter how deep a man sinks into his own vices, he will always find someone lower, someone against whom he can measure himself and come away satisfied. In doing so, he avoids the real question, not whether he is better than the worst, but whether he is good at all. There is also the favorite excuse of the modern mind: moral ambiguity. What does it really mean to be wrong? The more a man wishes to excuse his actions, the more he will muddy the waters of right and wrong. He will ask whether morality is not merely a social construct, whether the old rules are outdated, whether virtue itself is too rigid to fit into the complexities of the world. This excuse is particularly effective because it allows a man to sin while still considering himself intelligent. To reject morality outright would seem brutish, but to question it endlessly, never arriving at a firm answer, that is the method of the truly sophisticated sinner. Then comes the plea to human nature. Everyone does it. A man caught in wrongdoing will remind himself that he is not alone. He will cite history, philosophy, literature, and his next-door neighbor, all of whom, in one way or another, have stumbled in the same way. What is the use of resisting, he will ask, when failure is inevitable? What is the purpose of striving when perfection is impossible? If all men are weak, then weakness is no longer a fault but a shared condition, something to be accepted rather than fought against. The great danger in this excuse is that it removes all incentive to struggle against vice, replacing it with comfortable surrender. And finally, there is the most insidious of all, the appeal to goodness itself. It was for a greater cause, a man will say as he breaks a promise, as he speaks a lie, as he steps over another to reach his goal. He convinces himself that his wrongdoing serves a higher purpose, that the means are justified by the noble ends he seeks. What does one small act of dishonesty matter if it is in service of something grand? What is a little cruelty if it brings about justice? But vice, once excused, does not remain small. The man who tells himself that he is justified in one evil act will find it easier to justify another, and another, until he no longer recognizes where virtue ends and wickedness begins. A man who excuses his vices does not merely avoid guilt, he reshapes his very soul. He trains himself to see evil as necessity, sin as wisdom, selfishness as strength. And so, without ever choosing to be wicked, he becomes so, not through great monstrous acts of depravity, but through the quiet erosion of his conscience, one excuse at a time. Power, in its purest form, is neither good nor evil. It is merely the ability to act, to shape the world, to exert influence over men, events, and circumstances. But power does not remain neutral for long. It calls to those who desire control, who fear uncertainty, who crave recognition, and once it takes hold of a man, it does not easily let go. There is a hunger in it, a thirst that cannot be quenched, a whisper that says, just a little more. No matter how much a man possesses, it is never enough. The whisper that says, just a little more. The pursuit of power does not always begin with grand ambitions. It often starts small. An extra privilege gained, a slight advantage secured, a moment of control over another. The man who seizes it tells himself it is harmless, that he is merely ensuring his own security, that a little authority is necessary to keep things in order. But power is an intoxicating thing, to be obeyed, to be feared, to be needed. These are pleasures few can resist once they have tasted them. What was once a means to an end becomes the end itself. The man who sought power for security now seeks it for its own sake. The first sign of corruption is never cruelty, it is justification. The powerful man convinces himself that his strength is for the good of others. He does not hoard authority, he tells himself. He merely takes what is necessary to maintain stability. He does not silence dissent. He merely ensures that foolish voices do not lead others astray. He does not crush opposition. He simply removes obstacles for the greater good. In his mind he remains virtuous, even as his grip tightens. The more power he gains, the more he fears losing it, and the more he fears losing it, the harsher his measures become. There is a peculiar deception in power. The man who wields it often believes he is in control, but in truth he is controlled by it. The more he accumulates, the more he must defend. He begins to see threats in every corner, disloyalty in every friend, rebellion in every whisper. He surrounds himself with those who flatter him, who tell him what he wishes to hear, who reassure him that he is right. He loses the ability to hear the truth, for truth is dangerous to those who have built their thrones on illusion. The hunger for power is never sated, because it is not truly about power at all. It is about fear. The man who seeks to rule over others does so because he is terrified of being ruled himself. He cannot bear the thought of being weak, of being at the mercy of another, of being forgotten or ignored. And so he clings to his authority with desperation, convinced that without it he is nothing. He may tell himself that he is strong, But in truth, he is the most fearful of all, for he has built his entire sense of worth on something that can be taken from him in an instant. What is most tragic about this hunger is that it blinds a man to the one thing he truly desires. He seeks power because he believes it will give him security, respect, and control over his own fate. But the stronger his grip, the more fragile his position becomes. He rules, yet he trusts no one. He commands, yet he lives in paranoia. He controls everything, yet he has peace in nothing. In the end, the man who seeks absolute power finds himself utterly alone, enslaved by the very thing he believed would set him free. Hope is among the most fragile and yet most powerful forces within the human soul. It does not demand immediate fulfillment, nor does it require proof. It is the quiet conviction that something better exists beyond the present suffering, the belief that light still waits at the end of darkness. But because hope sustains, because it gives strength to endure, it is also something that must be destroyed if one wishes to break a man completely. A person without hope is a person without resistance, without expectation, without the will to rise again. And so, wherever there is a desire for control, for dominance, for the crushing of the human spirit, hope is always the first target. The destruction of hope does not usually happen all at once. It begins slowly, like a creeping shadow, taking hold where the spirit is most vulnerable. A person may suffer hardship and yet endure if he believes that the pain has meaning, that an end will come, that there is something to fight for. But if he begins to doubt, if he starts to believe that all effort is futile, that suffering is endless, that no good will ever come, then the ground beneath him begins to collapse. He does not need to be forced into submission, he will give up willingly. Even worse than mockery is betrayal. A man may hold on to hope despite hardship, despite opposition, despite ridicule, but if his hope is built on something that proves false, something that collapses beneath him when he needs it most, then the wound runs deeper than all others. A promise made and broken, a friend trusted and lost, a cause fought for and revealed as corrupt. These things do not merely wound the heart, they teach it not to trust again. This is why betrayal is so devastating, why it leaves scars that linger long after the pain has faded. To have hope destroyed by an enemy is one thing, to have it shattered by the very thing one relied upon is another. But perhaps the surest way to destroy hope is to take from a man the sense that he matters at all. As long as a person believes he has purpose, that his life carries weight, that his struggles mean something, he will continue to fight. But if he is convinced that he is nothing, that he is just another face in the crowd, another life that will pass unnoticed, another voice that will never be heard, then his hope will wither on its own. A man who believes he is insignificant will not seek anything higher, he will not strive, he will not dream, he will not stand. He will stay where he is. He will stay where he is, I think. He will simply exist, waiting for the days to pass, living without truly being alive.